Dentistry and General Radio Network presents The Fountain Pen Chronicles with Dr. Bob Dee and Tim Ettenheim. Brought to you by Digapalooza, the premier CE event every November in Chicago. This exclusive event features world-renowned speakers delivering quality bread and butter topics that is more than CE. It's a connection to a supportive dental community. For early bird pricing and more details, visit dentistryingeneral.com. In this episode, an introduction to Tim Ettenheim, his background, how he became a fountain pen restorer, and his passion for vintage fountain pens. A discussion of 4 specific vintage pens, the Aurora 88, Wall Eversharp Doric, Geha, and Esterbrook, with details on their history, unique features, and mechanics.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm here with a friend, Tim Ettenheim, and you guys may think that this is going to be a dental interview, and it has a dental connection. Tim is my mentor for fountain pens. And for those of you who know me, I am now obsessed with fountain pens, and that's all I talk about based on what my wife says, Tim. And and I want to first tell a quick story how Tim and I met, and that is that
I'm curious if we tell the same story.
So I was looking for a gift, and I have nightmares about this story, Tim, and I'm going to tell you why. I was looking for a gift for one of my speakers for my event, Digapalooza, Dr. Lincoln Harris. And I went to his wife in Australia through someone we knew, and I asked her what he likes. And they gave me a list of things. And one of them was a fountain pen, and that said, oh, he had a fountain pen that he lost that he loved. So I went to another Facebook group that Lincoln wasn't a part of, and I posted something that, hey, I'm looking, does anybody have an idea? And my friend was also part of that and messaged me privately, Dr. Mitch Rubenstein, and told me, Bob, I have a patient that's into a lot of these
patient he's had for almost 50 years.
Yeah. And that's, make a long story short, Tim and I met, and Tim, this is my nightmare, Tim, you recommended a pen. And after going back and forth, I decided, because he travels a lot, I didn't want the pressure on the airplane to make a difference, it ruin it. And a month after I decided to buy a new pen for him based on your recommendation, the Pelican M800, I went back to Tim. I said, Tim, I think I want that pen for myself. And Tim says, are you crazy? That's sold 2 weeks after you said no. I want that pen. So if any of Tim's
I haven't seen one since.
If any of Tim's customers are listening to this and you have that pen, we're going to talk about it. I want it. Tim, I know I talked a little too much in the beginning, but I want you to, first of all, introduce yourself and where you're located, what's behind you. Tell me a little about Tim.
Happy to, Bob. Talking about myself has never been my favorite activity, but I'll do so now. As Bob said, I'm Tim Ettenheim. My business is Tim's Vintage Pens. And Tim's Vintage Pens started in 2015, after a little bit of experimentation. It found me. I've been a fountain pen user since I was given a Parker 21 for my bar mitzvah in 1965. For my high school graduation present, my parents had just come back from Switzerland, and on the way back, they stopped in Germany, and they bought me a Mont Blanc 149, the Meisterstück of pens. It is this pen, which, by the way, has never been restored and almost never been out of ink. It has, as you can see, it's not far from me. I got my third pen when I was a freshman in college, and I had left my Mont Blanc at home. It is this pen, a Pelican 120. And so I've been a fountain pen user since I was 13 years old, and now I'm a bit over 70. In 2007, I was looking through some of my late father-in-law's things while he was failing, and he was a collector of collectors. He had all kinds of stuff, and came across a box with some pencils and pens in it, and I found 2 Parker 51 fountain pens. This is in use right now. I took them and said, may I keep these? I'm so curious about how it works. And these 2 pens became my first restorations. My sister-in-law, his daughter, has the other one. And then the bug hit hard. And over the next 4 or 5 years, I bought several hundred pens inexpensively, restored most of them, the ones that I could figure out how to take them apart and deal with them. And around 2014, I realized that there was no way that I could afford what I wanted to do unless I started selling my work. So I went back and sold the first 100 or so, which taught me about risk and dealing with customers and how I had to know it was the right kind of work. And over the next couple of years, the notion of the business began to take hold in me. In 2017, I built a website, which was the first version of timsvintagepens.com. And at that point, neither of my daughters anymore wanted their bedroom any longer. And so what was their bedroom here in my wife's and my Greenwich Village apartment became my shop. And I really dug in hard. At that point, customers started buying my pens. I was smart enough to keep prices low enough while I gathered pens around me and gathered skills. And it was a tremendous amount of focused skill building that went into those first few hundred pens. At that point, I had a day-long conversation with one of the deans of pen restoration at the Long Island Pen Show. And at first he said, "Am I going to be a competitor?" And I said, "I don't think so. I've already got a stressful job. Thank you very much. I don't need a second one." And he said, "The hard part about restoring pens is making sure that you can get through the other end." And he said, "It took me maybe 2,500 pens before I realized that I could fix just about any pen I laid my hands on."
Mhm.
And I had spent my first career as a hospital administrator. And I said, "Oh, so it's like the old anesthesiologist joke. The easy part is putting them to sleep." And he looked at me and his jaw dropped and he said, "I'm going to use that." It's true. In many ways, true. Although I'm not dealing with a person anymore, if I'm taking in somebody else's pen, I got to know I can fix it. And it wasn't until 2020 that I publicly started taking pens in for repair, which is an altogether different venture. By that time, I had purchased my first lathe, knowing nothing about pen mechanics or engineering. And I tried to study it, but realized that the only way that I was going to learn how to deal with the fine tolerances of pen work was by doing some building myself. And I got an outrageous deal on a 1943 Logan lathe, which I sold this past fall. And it was causing me some physical stress. It was a big old machine that I adored. I restored it mechanically, and it was working just fine. But like owning a vintage car, you had to make sure it was working well every time you used it.
Mhm.
And I sold it while I was recovering from shoulder surgery this past fall and bought a brand new lathe. It's hard to see from here. Maybe in a further episode, we'll focus in on that, on work at that a little. And it's a wonderful brand new machine. And the best part about it is just as accurate as the old one, but it keeps its calibration. So when I have something I need to do, I just turn around from my bench to the lathe, flip the switch, and I'm working.
Gotcha.
So it has grown by leaps and bounds. I do not have a storefront. My storefront is my website. For some crazy reason, it has gotten to the point where 3 or 4 times a year when I put up new inventory and the 400 some people on my email list get an email, within 2 days, all the good stuff is gone. And I've been accused of operating a business like the one that Richard Binder, who is one of the true deans of pen restoration in America, used to have, where on the midnight of every new month, he would put a pen tray up for sale. And by 12:15, it would be gone. And now there are 2 or 3 buyers for every one of my better pens, which is a little scary. It's the price of success. And I'm delighted that there's a public out there that seems to want what I do. I'm arrogant enough to only do what I want to do. And if they don't buy it, somebody will. And so over the years, I've developed a variety of focuses that other people in the States are not particularly interested in. And those are dealing with French and Italian pens, and more recently, German pens. They're all different and all interesting. I adore Italian pens and the vintage ones. I'm fascinated by vintage German pens because of their subtle differences. They were made in an entirely different competitive environment, and so they look and feel in many ways the same as opposed to Italian pens. And we can talk about that in the future. And I'm also fascinated by the American pens from the 19 teens until the 1960s that were made by companies that were not durable, the companies that were not successful, that created good products, but they couldn't succeed for good reasons and bad reasons, against Waterman, Parker, Schaefer, and some of the others. There are companies that rose and fell. There are companies that just never made it. And there were hundreds of companies in the pre-Depression years, all of whom were a flash in the pan. And I love getting hold of and restoring those pens and putting them on my website. They often go very inexpensively, and they're fun for me. And I have a lot of customers who love pens that aren't famous. So it's a lot of things. And frankly, I was able to retire from my executive work pushing on 3 years ago, partially because I felt I had done my job and didn't want to face doing more, but also because I felt I could, and I had a craft facing me that needed my daytime hours, no longer just the evening hours. And I talked to a lot of people before I did it, and including our board at my old graduate school, most of whom were present and former major museum directors. And to a person, they told me I should go for it. And that helped. And I've been running real fast ever since and keep trying to keep up with people like you who are, as the sales volume grows, sending me more pens to repair and more challenging pens to repair, and also buying the things that I restore and sell. And frankly, it is a wonderful challenge. It's a brain challenge in getting the history. It's a research challenge. It's a fingers challenge in getting it to look right. It's a design challenge for me to try and decide what this pen looked like when it was new. And they are not as perfect as a Concours car looks when it's restored, just as they didn't look like that when they were new.
Right.
And the fabrication challenges as I build parts that clearly no longer exist is a machining challenge for which I am probably uniquely unprepared, but am teaching myself. So I'm a guy in his 70s in my kid's bedroom here in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, doing something that to me is phenomenally interesting and that I hope I have a good many years to keep doing.
It's a great introduction to who Tim is. I wanted to tell you that I had a couple of fountain pens that came from the old country, and my parents brought it. It was actually Parker. That's the main fountain pen in Iran. What I wanted to tell you is
You still have them?
Oh, yeah. I think I photograph them and I'll send them to you and see what that is.
Sure.
I also have some wooden pens that my parents brought for me from last trip. They're the calligraphy ones.
Yeah, that's a different story.
Yeah. But I wanted to talk about the fact that what emotions a fountain pen has created in me. I am accused of...
They do that to people.
Yeah, I'm accused of being obsessive over different things, right? And I get that. But this is different. The fact that I need to start writing or journaling, or even I call mine ugly art, or drawing with different pens and different inks, it relaxes me. But I have to tell you, Tim, when people come over to my house, or if I go somewhere else and I have my what I call everyday carry pens, that mean not the ones that you would give me. They don't leave the house. No, I carry
Most of them can. They're meant to be used.
I know, but I use them in the house. I don't want to lose them. That's what I'm afraid of, right? But when I give it to someone new, they're like, what is a fountain pen? Or, oh my God, how much? Once they start writing, almost always every single person is fascinated. They may not right away jump into starting collecting or even buying, but they always ask me, so where should I start? And I know a lot of the pen gurus tell them to start with under the $50 fountain pens, this and that. But as I told you, I would love for people to start with a vintage pen to see how that is. And Tim's website is one of the websites that I probably visit, Tim. I don't know if I told you this or not, almost every night before I go to bed.
That's far more often than I see it.
And that's how I found out that there was something going on with your website. and I pick a pen, and this is what I want this podcast to form into, is that pick a few pens and talk about them so people can know about these pens that the companies may or may not exist anymore. Nobody talks about them except the pen community. And I feel like more people would be in the pen community if they knew the history and how great these writing instruments are. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I certainly agree. They bring up all kinds of emotions when you use them. I'm inspired by a goodly number of my newer customers, who are usually people in their 30s and 40s, who have just finished cleaning out their parents' dressers, their late parents' dressers, or their desks, or as their parents age, they pass things on to them. And those pens come to me usually to be repaired, restored for them. And often that sparks more pens for them.
Mhm.
It's interesting that, as far as I'm concerned, you don't need a vintage pen to really enjoy it. New pens can give you the same kind of satisfaction. I do use new pens sometimes. I usually have one in my shirt pocket when I'm in the New York City subway system, where I try to not carry one of my better vintage pens. But there's such a wide range, and while the vintage pens to me are absolutely wonderful and personal, they do present more of a challenge than many people want. And they want something that where the nib is perhaps a little bit softer, can write a little bit smoother. They hadn't invented butter smooth iridium nib tipping in the 1940s. It wasn't a thing yet. So you learn, I tell people what to look for.
Mhm.
They want pens that are sometimes mechanically a little less challenging with fewer moving parts. And sure, you have many truly inexpensive pens that are outstanding manufactured items.
Mhm.
They're great to use. They're fun to use. You can toss it in your jacket pocket and not worry about it. Those pens are generally not for me, but I'm happy to steer people to good ones, because as far as
Right.
I'm concerned, the pen experience is a good one. It's an antidote to all day at a computer. It's an antidote to a day that may be less mindful than it could be.
Mhm.
And to me, it's a much more mindful experience to use a pen and to write. One of my customers is a very active Instagram following, and she is a master of many different writing styles. She can write like a typewriter,
Wow.
and her lettering is just phenomenal. I can't do that. I can write legibly for me. Happily, I don't have to write for anybody anymore, but it can suit you. It can do for you what it does for me, but in your own way. There I have a customer who is a digital artist who uses my Esterbrook pens in his plotter, which is fascinating. And so there are all kinds of ways that these pens can bring something out of you or emphasize something that you want to emphasize. And if I can help you get involved in that world, fantastic. That's really
Yeah.
what I'm here for.
Yeah, and I got to tell you how I use mine. I told you I draw, do different things, but one of the main things that I do is that I have a team of people that help me with this dentistry in general platform. And when I have ideas, I like to write them. I realize that my ideas actually can be more inspiring to myself, so I can come up with better ideas once I draw them. And then I take a picture of them, then I text it to my team and I say, take a look at that. So that has become part of my routine now. Like all of my texts to my team are basically my handwriting notes and some of these beautiful notebooks that my kids now buy me. This collecting fountain pens, it's not just about fountain pens either. It's about ink and paper and fountain pens.
Struggling with the pressures of private practice? Digapalooza is here to help. Hosted by Dentistry in General, the first weekend of November in Chicago, this unique event features all-star speakers, recognized globally for their expertise, delivering carefully selected topics designed to give you actionable takeaways for your practice. These aren't your typical lectures. Plus, sponsors are handpicked to support independent dentists against private equity-backed offices. The learning continues beyond the classroom with insights from thousands of practices. Don't miss out. Early bird discounts are available now, but spots are limited and going fast. Secure yours at dentistryingeneral.com.
I also want to put up a picture. And you talk about a few pens that I just received from a friend of mine. First of all, let me tell you guys that any pen I buy, other than the ones that are under $20, I consult Tim. The ones under $20, Tim knows I do some experimentation with them. I've just ruined one trying to grind the nib. But I buy different types of nibs to see how I like it, so I can then look for them in the expensive pens. You do have recommendations about new pens, because when I
Absolutely.
came to you and I said, look, I want to buy a few new pens, and you talked to me about the Pelican M800, the Pilot Custom 743 and 825, and the Sailors. They're awesome, great pens out
There
there.
are
Correct?
magnificent pens that could not have been built, manufactured a generation ago. As
Mhm.
modern technology is just phenomenal. There are individual pen makers out there who are doing just unbelievable work now,
Mhm.
both from a functional and a design perspective. So yeah, we can absolutely talk about that.
Yeah, then the next time I'm coming, I know I have a few pens that you like. Oh, how does that write? Like Visconti Homo sapien Bronze Age, that I'm going to bring it with me to New York when if we're going to meet next time. So you can tell me what you think of them.
Okay.
Because I'd love to know your opinion and compare it to mine, because everybody's going to have a different opinion about pens.
Yeah, there may be some objective facts in modern and vintage pens about how well a pen is made, how well its parts fit, how well it functions. Whether or not it writes, if it transmits ink from its inside to paper
Mhm.
in a reliable manner, that's where the objectivity ends. From then
Okay.
on, it's a purely personal, subjective experience. I would not presume to tell you that's a good pen or a bad pen if it's working.
Yeah, and I think I knew you weren't going to get it, so I had to send you one of my inexpensive pens. They were surprisingly good, right?
Yep, yep.
The ones that are
That blue Chinese pen you sent me is
right.
in my parka pocket. You just have to keep in mind that the backs of the people whom those pens were manufactured with, that they're sold for next to nothing. And the manufacturing quality is sometimes outstanding. At some point, when we talk about Parker pens, I'll show you a Chinese knockoff that writes better than a Parker. And
Yeah.
unless you know the difference, it looks just like it. But yeah, they can be absolutely outstanding pens and cost us next to nothing.
I look at it as the gateway drug, right? The
I
cheap
think I may have
pens,
taught you that expression.
the cheap pens are the gateway to
Yeah.
Tim's vintage website. That's how I look at it. But
Yep.
I want to share this picture. I haven't put it up on Instagram because I want it to be here first.
I recognize those pens.
And these are the four I just recently got from Tim.
Mhm.
And they're lovely. Could you take a couple of minutes going
Sure.
from left to right and tell me what they are and a little bit about them? Because,
Sure. It's a fascinating array.
right.
Two of the four are European pens. You have them lined up just perfectly as well.
Uh-huh.
Starting from the left as you look at the screen is a 1950s Aurora 88.
That's the one with the gold cap.
With the gold cap. The Aurora 88, and we will spend a little bit of time in a future session talking about Aurora 88s because they have their own very deep and rich history, were the first, not this generation of them, but the prior generation in 1947 to 49, were the first new pens made in Italy after the end of the war. The Aurora family factory was bombed, and because it was used for munitions during the war. And after the war, as the Marshall Plan took hold, Aurora was bringing itself back together again. And Aurora found that many of the American soldiers coming over with the Marshall Plan were carrying Parker 51s in their pocket. So their first pen, and we'll talk about the comparisons between Aurora 88s, which are uniquely Italian, and Parker 51s, which are quintessentially American, are also comparisons. And so they shamelessly copied many of the traits of the characteristics of a Parker 51 and made an all new pen. It's driven by an internal piston, which is that knob in the bottom. It's called a blind cap. And they have a hooded nib, which I'll show you. And they are just lovely writers. And they produce something like 17 different kinds of nibs. Now you get what you get when you find them, but they're wonderful pens. I have quite a few of them, and I usually try to restore one for every inventory batch.
Yeah, I have 3 of them now. I have this
But
one.
one of them is modern.
Yes, I have this one that's a 1950s, as you said. I have one that's one of the early ones. When did they first come out?
49.
49, because it's this, the serial number is a 6-digit instead of 7.
We can talk about the Aurora serial numbers.
Yeah, those are fascinating. I've been reading about them. And then I bought a new one, the what they call it, the Red Mamba Aurora 88, which I still love. It's very well made and writes very well. I like it. So what is about the second one that is so unique from everything else I own?
Iconic is generally not a word that I use, but in the early 1930s, the Wahl company, WAHL, which owned what the brand that we learned later was Eversharp, came out with what was their pretty much final great model called the Doric. And they had a series of very successful, extremely well-made decorative pens through the 1920s, while Wahl was trying to catch up to Parker and Schaefer and Waterman. And that little round item you see just below the top of the cap is what they called their gold seal, capitalized. The gold seal was their mark for their top quality pen. And this Doric is clearly reminiscent of a Greek Doric column. It's 12-sided, which in that day was an interesting manufacturing job. It wasn't as easy to mill those 12 sides as it is now with CNC. And they made this quite lovely pen. Clearly, the design, you can see where the clip on the cap is lower than the top, which meant that as a gentleman stuck that into his vest pocket in his suit, it would stick up high. So that is without question an executive's pen, and it's made in a lovely reddish celluloid, which was new in those days, and it was an adventurous level of manufacturing all around. It turns out to have been the Wahl Company's last major pen, and in addition, these turned out to be quite fragile. And I was fortunate enough to been able to purchase two of these, this one and a slightly smaller one, and restored. And Bob now is the happy owner of this pen. It's a lovely writer. The Wahl pens had a very distinctive writing style, and I can show you that in their nib in a future time. But these are good pens. They are quite rare because they turned out to be very fragile. And it was something in the celluloid they used that just didn't last quite as long as some of the other companies.
Great, great. And that the third one, I keep mispronouncing it because there is an insurance company. Here's the dental connection. There is an insurance company named Geha, and it spells exactly the same. So this is Geha.
Yes, it is different, but it's Geha, actually.
Geha, okay.
And that stands for the Gebrüder Handel. They were two brothers in Germany who in the 19-teens built an office supply company. Geha did not actually start building fountain pens until after World War II. So they had the benefit of a lot of years before them, and they just dipped right into it. They were in Hanover, and which is also where Pelican was, and I believe still is. And there was a very large fountain pen community around them. And they started with fountain pens new after World War II in the early 1950s. This pen is unlike almost any other German pen of the era in that it's red. Almost every German pen of the era was black. And they were made of an acrylic resin, which was typical, or celluloid, which was also typical. Geha started with acrylic resin pens. You can always tell just by the shine. But finding a red one is very unusual. As you can see also by the blind cap and the cap on the bottom of the pen, it's a piston-operated pen, just like the Aurora was. Many higher-end European pens were pistons. This, however, is not a high-end pen. This was probably one step above a budget pen, what the Germans often called a Schulfiller, a school pen. But it's a beautiful pen with a very nice clip that says Geha on it. Most did not. And they also invented a cute little hidden device, what they called the Reservetank, which is a little hidden reserve ink area behind the feed, so that when you ran out of ink, you reached up, you activate the reserve tank, and you get another page out of it.
Oh, wow.
I don't even know if I showed you how to operate that, but I will.
No, I have not. I'm gonna take a look at it.
And I bought that pen basically because a friend of mine who's a very well-known restorer and inventor of pens in Germany, and I were talking one day, and he showed it to me, and he said, "Do you want this?" And I said, "Of course, why not?" I had imagined that I might want to keep it, but I'm a left-handed overwriter. And there are a lot of pens that will work wonderfully for right-handed underwriters, which is the vast majority of the population, but not for me. And so I decided that much as I loved it, it belonged with somebody else. And I didn't have it very long. I think I only had it for 3 or 4 months, and I restored it, and now you see it's Bob's.
Um,
Yeah.
The last one, the green one,
Yep.
is a special one for me because I think I have 4 or 5, or maybe 5 or 6 of these that I have chosen. This is the one, Tim, I believe, in my opinion, my rookie opinion, is that people who want to get into fountain pens should start with one of these because they're not that expensive as a vintage and they are great writers.
Yep. I'll tell you, this is an Esterbrook J. They came in black and solid black and in marbled celluloid like this one in green, red, blue, copper, and silver. And some of the greens look gray and some of the coppers look brown. They're not all the same. They're very interesting pens. Esterbrook, your listeners may recognize, was a name, the brand for calligraphy nibs going back to the 1840s, I believe, in the States and England. And in the 1920s, they realized that the world was getting away from them. And so they created their first fountain pen to use their nibs and eventually stopped making the dipper calligraphy nibs and only made fountain pens. Their big generation of pens was from about 1946, 1947, after the war's end, until 1960, roughly, when they made the J family in 3 lengths. And there were 3 different sizes of them. And they look all like this in different colors. They are incredibly durable. They almost always work amazingly well. Esterbrook kept their tradition of having nibs that you could swap in and out by putting those in their fountain pens. It's the only fountain pen of the era with a swappable nib, and you just unscrew it. Now, almost every nib is that way because it was better to manufacture them that way. They come in nib units, but Esterbrook was 50 years ahead of the game. And they didn't make that much of a deal of it. Their line was basically, for people who are old enough to remember, a dime store line. They stood on the counter next to the cash register in dime stores, what today are drugstores, Woolworths, McCory's, all the dime stores. And they sold for $1 to $3. This was a $2.50 or a $3 pen, depending on when it was sold. And along with Parker 51s, which are still the most sold pen in history, right behind them were probably Esterbrook's because they were so inexpensive. Clearly, nobody had any idea that 80 years later, these pens would still be actively in use, easily restored. I've repaired innumerable cracks. They are just unbelievable pens. I use them a lot of the time. My personal collection has 5 or 6 of them. And a number of years ago, I was able to get hold of what I call a bushel of them and have been selling them and repairing them in pretty large quantities ever since. I'm starting to run out of those. Some of the colors are not available in every size anymore. And their prices have not gone up that much. They're readily available on eBay, unrestored, but you then have to find somebody like me to get it to work again. But they are still absolutely wonderful pens. I was very pleased a couple of years ago when a couple of friends of mine who are the principals of the Kenro Company, who are the U.S. distributors for a number of modern Italian pen makers, reissued Esterbrook's under their ownership, but it's a new pen that somehow reminds you of the old Esterbrook's. And when people started to reach out to them to have their Esterbrook's repaired, they said, sorry, we don't do that, but we know a guy who does. Right. These things they have a way of coming to me, and I love repairing them, and they're fun. And these are the true gateway drug. And I always remind people when they, as Bob just said, they are the best pen to start with, in my view. Yeah. Because they teach you everything you need to know about vintage pens at a small fraction of the entrance fee. And they come in a wonderful variety, and they make great presents, and may they last forever.
Yeah, and I bought this for my nephew because he collects watches, and now his wife is mad at me because he's buying pens. And I don't know if
they're cheaper than watches.
I don't know if you noticed this Mont Blanc little star on this. This is a notebook that my staff actually gave me for Christmas. So I use it as a background for my photography as well. But I want to quickly go.
By the way, Bob, I don't want to correct you, but that's not a star.
Oh, they call it the Mont Blanc. It
Do,
isn't.
do you know what it is? The
Go for it,
brand
right?
Mont Blanc is one word, but it
Uh,
clearly was from Mont Blanc in Switzerland. And that is the symbol of the mountain,
Blanc, right?
the snow-capped peak of the mountain.
Yes, yes. So I want to quickly go through these
Yep.
pictures that I forgot to actually put through. This is the Aurora 88 nib that looks very much like the Parker 51. It's a beautiful, you actually have a see-through tank inkwell. This is the Geha. Did I say it right?
Also with an inkwell.
Yes, also with an inkwell and beautiful nib. And this is the Geha writings that Tim was talking about.
By
This
the way,
is,
if you could quickly go back to the same picture, just back 2 pictures to the Aurora 88. And there you can see the ink window goes down to, it ends here. It ends at the point where that silver ring is.
oh,
It's the bottom of the barrel, but it does not extend into what's called the gripping section. Now go to the Geha.
huh?
And the same picture with the Geha, focus in there, and you can see that it goes all the way to the bottom.
All the way to the bottom.
They
I
invented
gotcha.
that. Just another one
Wow.
of those little interesting pieces of trivia, and that's where the reserve tank is.
Oh, I see. I see. That's the reserve tank. That's
The
crazy. And
very
this is,
bottom of it is the reserve tank.
and this is
Here is
the,
the Eversharp nib in the Doric.
yeah,
And I
this is
also
very
want to point
flexible.
out that you can see with my pens, when you magnify them, you see all kinds of warps and of scratches and lines and wear points. I made the aesthetic decision a number of years ago to not make those disappear when I restore a pen. If a pen has a lot of wear, I take off the layers of dirt and grime and the stuff that comes off easily, but I like pens to have the character that shows where they were.
Yeah. And
And
this
you
is
can
a,
really see that in this pen.
yeah, and this is a lever filler, which the first time you sent one to me, I didn't know how to do it. I'm like, oh, I forgot to tell you how to fill it.
It's not knowledge you're born with. You got to learn it somehow.
Yes, and you have to almost prime this just like a snowblower here in the cold weather states. Almost have to do it like 5 or 6 times.
If you use that pen a lot, you wouldn't have to prime it anymore.
I got you. So if you're just refilling it, yes. But the amount of pens that you got me into now, which I get me in trouble. Sometimes I have to clean these and put them on display. I wanted to show what things are available. Tim's Vintage Pens is his website. Tim has a lot of different Esterbrook ones, right? And we talked about not being too expensive. I think they're between $50 and $100, right? In that vicinity.
The typical J is either $50 or $55. I forget which. If you buy it with a less commonly found nib, it has a premium. But yeah, they get less than that. They get more than that. Some of the older models cost a little bit more, and with that, you get a little bit more fragility. But they have their own attractions. It's a phenomenally interesting brand that's worth looking into.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll probably spend a session talking about Esterbrook's and budget pens.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about nibs, what type of nibs there are. I can learn a lot more. I wanted to thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
Hopefully we can inspire a new generation of pen lovers. This is my thing about doing this because I enjoy it so much, and I'm not allowed to talk to my wife about pens. So I'm going to talk to Tim. Thank you very much for being here today, Tim.
My pleasure, Bob, and I look forward to developing our future sessions together.
Great, awesome.
That's a wrap, but your journey continues at Digapalooza this November in Chicago. Presented by Dentistry in General, this event connects you with world-class speakers, sharing insights you won't find anywhere else, and delivering carefully selected topics to help you grow clinically and professionally. Early bird pricing is available, but spots are limited and selling quickly. Elevate your skills and expand your network. Visit dentistryingeneral.com to register now.
This has been a production of Dentistry in General Radio Network. Visit our website, dentistryingeneral.com, to join engaging clinical and business conversations, explore our dental podcasts, and stay updated